Where's my list? Oh, I know where it is. All right, here we go. Welcome into another edition of Disputed National Championships right here at the Voice of College Football. Love doing this. Please check out our previous live streams as we went from 2022 all the way back through all the playoff era of 9 years and the BCS era going back to 1998. Now we've arrived at 1997. We're going to go through each and every season, even the seasons in which it seems to be clear-cut that there is a national champion, one national champion. We will even review those seasons, and it might take 13 seconds. But there's many other ones that are highly, highly complicated, and they're going to get more complicated from this year going backwards for the obvious reason that we had no BCS championship game that did not most of those years solve anything or completely solve anything, but it eliminated a lot. So if you objectively look at these seasons, objectively look at the results and measure the results, the BCS championship game was not a true championship in the manner that we are accustomed to in American sports with a Super Bowl, World Series, NBA championship, where there is a standing structure that leads us to a formatted playoff system that is not chosen by individuals, that leads to a championship series or championship game. These were two teams that were selected and thrown together, but at least that was an improvement from what we are now dealing with in 1997 and going back. All right, your national champions in college football. I will read them off. I'm not going to go through all the contingencies because I will post a video after we're done, which is going to go through all the seasons and confirm who has won the national championship here at the Voice of College Football. Who is the Voice of College Football national champion or champions for that year? And then also the contingencies in which a number of other teams had valid arguments to, during the playoff era or the BCS era, to have been selected to play in the playoff or in the BCS championship game. I'm not going to address all those situations and all those teams, just give you the confirmation of the Voice of College Football national champions, and then we'll get started with 1997 and we'll go back through the 1990s tonight. 2022 and 21, Georgia. 20 is Bama, LSU in 19, Clemson 18, Bama in 17, Clemson in 16, Bama in 15, Ohio State in 2014. So all the playoff champions confirmed. And I explained that at the time, and it's pretty self-explanatory. All right. 2013, Florida State. 2012, our first deviation. 2012, Alabama, Oregon, Ohio State are the national champions. 2011, it's Bama and LSU and Oklahoma State. 2010, Auburn. 2009, Alabama. 2008, Florida, Texas, USC, and Utah. 2007 national champion LSU, Georgia, USC, and Kansas. 2006, we've got Florida and Boise State. In 2005, it's Texas. In 2004, it's USC and Auburn. In 2003, LSU and USC. In 2002, Ohio State. 2001, Miami. 2000, it's Oklahoma. In 1999, Florida State. 1998, Tennessee. Those are your confirmed national champions with a number of conditions involved as well. Again, we will detail that in a final video. Speaking of videos, we released our first prediction video today. Please check it out. Washington Huskies. How will the Huskies finish? Take it to the bank. There you got the wins and losses. Take it to the over-under and make all sorts of money. No, really, please don't do that. My record says that you would make a lot of money, but you never know about the year 2023. All right, let's get right to it. Let's go to 1997. It's kind of a warm-up for bigger lifts that we're going to have to do later. So 1997, cut and dry, but we'll review anyway quickly. In 1997, and we know what the controversy is here, but we know what is right and proper. Michigan, Nebraska split a national championship, or in the eyes of Nebraska fans and Michigan fans that are logical and reasonable, they each won a national championship. They won a whole national championship. Either way, they are both the national champions. We know what happened that particular season in that Michigan was number one in both polls going into postseason play. Nebraska performed much better in its postseason game against Tennessee than Michigan did against Washington State. Completely reasonable. There is no way I will argue with any Michigan fan. I will argue with any Nebraska fan. You're completely biased. Of course, you're a fan. You don't need to apologize for that, but let's call it what it is. You're biased. You can't get past that your team has another team that also clearly won a national championship and had a rightful national championship just as much as your team. You cannot separate these two teams. You cannot distinguish them. Yes, we can go to points per game and it's Nebraska, yards per game and it's Nebraska, and we can go to defensive points per game and it goes Michigan's way, and we can go to the better postseason performance and that goes Nebraska's way, and we can go to the schedule, which is pretty much of a toss-up. It's extremely close to call. We can go with the better head-to-head win against a common opponent, and that goes to Michigan. We can go to the kicked pass in the end zone against Mizzou, and that goes to Nebraska, or goes to Michigan because Nebraska benefited from that crazy play. But when you add it all up, statistics are for losers. The results say that Michigan earned a national championship, and the results say that Nebraska just as much earned a national championship. If you would like to call and debate that with me, I am more than welcome to debate that. All right, so let's continue on because nobody else is in the picture for 1997. It is as clear cut as can be in its division of a championship, and its dividing of the championship into two parts. It's as clear as it can be. Leave your comments and questions, and I will get to them via the super chat. And of course, you can call. I've left the link in the chat, and it's also in the description section of the video. All right, now let's go to 1996 because this is not clear cut. This is not clear cut at all. 1996, going into postseason play, Florida State had won all of its games, and they had just defeated Florida in a rivalry game in Tallahassee. 24-17, I believe, was the final score. So Florida State won its big game. Arizona State had just won all of its games to go to 11-0 with the Pac-10 championship and a Rose Bowl appearance. Ohio State had fallen off from the number 1 position to drop to number 4 in the country because Ohio State lost to Michigan in a 13-9 game in Columbus. And likewise, we just mentioned that Florida went down to Florida State. So there you have a situation where in 1996, this is little talked about in the same way that other situations are, but in modern days, or at least in the BCS era, let's say, because we now have a playoff that would have involved those 4 teams, Florida State, Arizona State, Florida, and Ohio State. But in the BCS era, Florida State and Arizona State would have played. Nobody brings that up. Those are the 2 teams that would have played in the BCS era. However, what ended up happening here is, to me, very much a split national championship, because Florida easily won the vote in the AP, 65.5 to Ohio State's 1.5. And in the coaches poll, it went Florida's way 58-4. And I get it, because Florida, first of all, played an SEC championship game. So they won one more game than the others. Number 2, they decimated Florida State in a rematch 52-20 in the Sugar Bowl. But we do not treat bowl games as they are playoff games. They are not playoff games. They weren't playoff games. They were just additional games. Therefore, we are not eliminating teams from national championship consideration because they lost a bowl game. That is a huge black mark on their record and resume, but it's not a playoff game. It's not an eliminator in any such way. Reaching a bowl game wasn't like reaching the playoffs, and then if you lose the bowl game, you've been eliminated from a national championship. Well, the way it typically plays out, you have eliminated yourself by then not having a resume worthy of a national championship. But in and of itself, the bowl game should not eliminate the possibility that a team wins a national championship. So Florida gets the nod based on the voting there. We don't care what the voters did at the time. Florida, Ohio State, and Florida State, in my eyes, are all the national champions because they all lost one game. And Florida and Florida State split their series. That's all that matters, is the results of the games. And they split. Now, Arizona State gets eliminated by losing to Ohio State. Ohio State shares a national championship with Florida and Florida State in 1996. That is my logic. That's how we size up these resumes. Basically, every Power 5 team with the same record wins the national championship unless there is a head-to-head tiebreaker, or there is some level of egregious scheduling difference. And I believe we have yet to apply that. Now, in Kansas's favor in 2007, we elevated Kansas because they had actually, if you just went by the record in 2007, then Kansas would be the one national champion. It would only be Kansas. But their schedule was so poor, with 3 awful out-of-conference games, did not play 3 of the top 4 teams in the Big 12. Not their fault, but did not play them, that we raise all the other 2-loss teams to a national championship with Kansas in 2007. So hopefully you understand my logic there. Certainly you can call after we go through the 1990s. Florida, Ohio State, and Florida State are the national champions in 1996. We go to 1995. And in 1995, this is going to be rather clear-cut as well. Nebraska and Florida showed up at the Fiesta Bowl as the only undefeated teams in major college football, and Nebraska annihilated Florida. They are the national champion for 1995, period, and done, not even close. Nebraska 95 consensus champion. Once we go to 1994, we are going to have a very similar situation as to what we had in 1997. Same situation. We have two teams that steamrolled through their schedules, Nebraska and Penn State in 1994. Penn State, at one point in the season, you will see it. Let's see. This, it might have been in the coaches poll. No, it was week 9 against Illinois. See it right there. Penn State's number 1 at that point. What happened that particular week is Penn State struggled or seemingly struggled against Illinois. The final score was 35-29. Penn State had a huge lead. They gave up points in the fourth quarter. The game was never really in doubt, but Penn State got penalized by the voters and dropped to number 2. They never recovered. Nebraska won both polls. So, Michigan fans, Nebraska fans who are upset about 1997, consider you could be Penn State of 1994, in which you won all your games. You played in the Big Ten. You played against a tough schedule. You won the Rose Bowl by 18 points, and you did not win either half of the national championship. You did not get voted number 1. You lost in a landslide to Nebraska, 51.5 to 10.5. And the other vote in the coaches poll was 54-8. So 1994, again, we can dissect this if you would like to call and run it down with us. But Penn State is elevated to national championship status in 1994, along with Nebraska. All right. Is everyone following along? Here we go. 1993. This is going to be a difficult one from what I remember. Even though it does not seem like it should be difficult, it is. So the issue here is that Florida State finished with basically the same record as Notre Dame, Nebraska, and also you had West Virginia at 11-1. Actually, you had Ohio State at 10-1-1, but they get eliminated with that tie, as does Wisconsin. Those two teams tied 14 all late in the season. So here's the deal. Of course, Florida State and Bobby Bowden went to South Bend late in the season, second to last game of the season, I recall, and Notre Dame beat Florida State. So you would think Notre Dame would win the national championship. But no, the voters still went with Florida State. Nebraska was undefeated through the regular season and was paired against Florida State in the Orange Bowl. And it was a great game. It was a low-scoring game. And Nebraska moved the ball down the field in the final minutes, set up for what would have been a game-winning field goal, but it was badly missed. Think Ohio State, Georgia in this last season's, Peach Bowl semifinal game. That's the way that field goal had a shot. It did not. And Nebraska lost to Florida State. So we've got quite the conundrum here because the voters didn't seem to have any issue with this. Oh, Florida State, Nebraska, that was the de facto national championship game, and they won. Florida State did, so they're the national champion. Well, they barely won that game, and what is most important here is that Notre Dame beat Florida State head-to-head. I'm going to have to go back and look at the... Oh, yeah. The Notre Dame loss is a famous one, of course. They lost the game following the Florida State game in November. They lost to Boston College. It was not a bad Boston College team. There you see them at number 13 in the final polls at 9-3. Good Boston College team. beat Notre Dame on a last-second field goal. So Notre Dame finished 11-1 after they beat Texas A&M in the Cotton Bowl. That Texas A&M team finished number 9 in the country at 10-2. They were number 7 entering the Cotton Bowl. And there you got Nebraska at 11-1. Now, the issue with Auburn there at 11-0 is that Auburn was ineligible for postseason play. So we determined in 2012 that Ohio State would be eligible. If we were really going to be exhaustive here, we would want to look into the Auburn violations at the time. So did Auburn gain an unfair recruiting advantage? Did their cheating enhance their performance on the field? Meaning in 2012, Ohio State didn't gain anything from their players, quote unquote, cheating, breaking rules. They profited themselves monetarily. They traded awards for tattoos. So there was not cheating involved that aided performance. It wasn't like it was a recruiting violation that allowed a player to come to campus. It's not as though there was a grade that was changed to keep a player eligible. So hopefully everybody follows me there. The Auburn thing, I got to look into that. But as it stands right there, you've got 4 national champions. Let's look at Notre Dame. Yeah, we know who lost all those games. We know who lost the games. And had Auburn played as many games as the other teams, meaning they did not play an SEC championship game. This was the last. No, I'm sorry. This was 1993. Auburn was not eligible for the SEC championship. So they didn't play an SEC championship game, nor did they play a postseason game. So that's 2 possible losses. They would have had 2 opportunities to lose against good competition. Florida State, Notre Dame, Nebraska, and Auburn. The only thing to be decided there would be whether Nebraska is eliminated based on the loss to Florida State. And if anything, you eliminate Florida State based on their loss to Notre Dame. And you've got Notre Dame and Auburn as the national champions. Notre Dame and Auburn, the 1993 rightful national champions. 1992, I believe, is going to be clear cut from what I remember. Yes, so Miami and Alabama played in the Sugar Bowl. Miami was a pretty substantial favorite. They got blasted by Bama and Gene Stallings, 34-13. Bama finished 13-0. They are the only undefeated team in college football, aside from Michigan, but they tied 3 games, of course. So you've got Alabama 13-0, your 1992 national champion. Easy. Your 1991 season. This is going to be another edition of 1994 and 1997 revisited. Miami blasted everyone, finished 12-0. Washington blasted everyone, finished 12-0. Had a resounding win in the Rose Bowl over Michigan. Just clobbered Michigan. Like it was 34-14, but it was worse than that. Like Washington was great. Miami was great. And there you see Miami won 32-28 in the votes total in the AP, but in the coaches poll, Washington won 33.5 to 25.5. Actually, they were down. A very interesting vote going into postseason play where Washington had one less number 1 vote, but Miami was the number 2 team despite having more first place votes. So somebody voted Miami down for whatever reason. Anyway, it didn't matter. They split the national championship. That was valid. That was the right thing to do. And 2 exceptional teams. And they are each the national champion according to the Voice of College Football here. 1990. Okay. Let's get into this one. All right. So, one component that was not going to be part of this is trying to decide bad officiating and trying to filter through bad officiating. So, we are not going to do that when it comes to Colorado's win over Notre Dame in the Orange Bowl, in which Rocket Ismail returned a punt for a touchdown late in the game that would have surely won the game for Notre Dame because Colorado just flat out could not throw the ball downfield. They threw the ball for like 45 yards a game. So they got the ball. Had Notre Dame scored and there not been a clip called on the Notre Dame punt return, Notre Dame would have went up, 16-10. And Colorado would have had to score a touchdown to win, and they had like 45 seconds left in the game. So you still can't decide it or call it based on that. Even if you say we're going to override bad calls and Notre Dame would have won that game, you can't say that because Colorado still would have had the ball with 45 seconds left to play. But most likely they would have lost. But let's throw that out. They won. As a side note, I personally believe that Miami was the best team in the country that year. Miami and Florida State played one of their infamous wide right games. So between Miami and Florida State, wow. Yeah, Miami was the team that just blasted that number 3 ranked Texas team who could have won the national championship with a win. But Miami just annihilated them. So your national championship is Colorado 11-1-1 and Georgia Tech 11-0-1. And we haven't even hit on the bigger controversy, and that's, of course, the down play that gave Colorado an extra opportunity to defeat Missouri because the yard marker was screwed up and they got an additional play. If you're unaware of the deal, look it up. But we also have to consider that Colorado, I believe they downed the ball or they spiked the ball because they thought they had an extra down earlier, correct? Anyway, regardless, they were stopped on what was 4th down, but they thought it was 3rd down, and therefore they were given another 5th down. And what everyone thought at the stadium was a 4th down, and they scored to win the game at Missouri. This is a tough one to call. Georgia Tech did not exactly play a killer schedule either. So we can either award Georgia Tech sole possession of a national championship because they've got the undefeated record, or we could say Colorado played a much more difficult record or schedule, defeated Notre Dame in the Orange Bowl. Georgia Tech's opponent was a Nebraska team that finished 9-3. Again, this is back in the day when we should have had much better bowl matchups. Georgia Tech's playing for a national championship, and they're playing a 9-2 Nebraska team in the Citrus Bowl. So I believe it's Colorado, and I believe it's Georgia Tech, as was the case right there. There it is, 39-20 in Colorado's favor, as opposed to the coaches' poll, which went with Georgia Tech 30-27. And there you see Miami getting 2 first-place votes. So your national championship in 1990 goes to Georgia Tech, and it goes to Colorado as well. All right. We did have some issues the other night, if you caught the end of our show, in regards to some of our video feeds. So what we're going to do going forward is, if we bring on a caller to discuss and we're not familiar with that caller, we'll just treat it like a radio call, and we will just bring on the caller, and we will just listen to the audio, and we will keep me on a full screen. So we've got Nathan jumping on the line here at the Voice of College Football. Nathan, we appreciate you being here.
Hey, I appreciate everything you do.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. How's it going tonight?
It's going good. It's going good. Just watching some preview videos after work for the college football season, and I saw that you were going live, so I had to jump on as a PSU fan.
Yeah. So what do you got for us tonight?
So it's 2 years before I was born. I was born in '96, but my dad and mom talk endlessly about 1994 and Penn State and how they deserve to have a title for that year. So what I was curious about is, if you were analyzing this from a 2023 standpoint, and
Yep.
you were looking at it from, okay, strength of opponent, strength of schedule, and basically, trying to seed up the teams for a college football playoff matchup. Looking at the games in that season and just, knowing what you know from the records that the teams finished with,
Yep.
um, is there any type of, is there any type of legitimacy in what they're telling me about how this was just ridiculous and it was a popularity contest and, Penn State should have been, and not clear cut, but at least a split national champion that year?
Well, of course, they should have been a split national championship because you got two teams playing in major conferences, and Penn State had a very legitimate schedule that we will pull up here and take a look at.
I think they
Absolutely.
started off the year that year. I think it was a college football game day matchup against Arizona. If I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, but
So that I believe you're talking about 1999 was when
yeah,
they played Arizona, correct? Yeah,
yeah,
98
I
or
definitely could
99.
be off. Yeah.
This is the schedule from 1994 for Penn State. So they demolished Minnesota 56-3. They played a USC team that actually didn't finish to be that good overall, but started off number 14. They beat them easily by 24. Look at that Iowa game. They beat them by 40. They just had just a killer offense with Kerry Collins at quarterback and Keyjana Carter at running back, who almost won the Heisman Trophy. The Rutgers game, they won by 28. They beat Temple by 27. There's a Michigan game. So they went to Michigan, got challenged in that one. I'm sure I watched it, don't necessarily remember it. 31-24. This Ohio State game, my goodness. That was not a good Ohio State team, but they weren't a bad Ohio State team. They finished second in the Big Ten, and they took Bama to the wire in the Citrus Bowl. But this game was a complete just demolition. I think it was 35-0 at half when they beat Ohio State. Again, the games that killed them were those two games on the road, Indiana and Illinois, in terms of the voters.
Yeah, that seems pretty obvious to me, as they had two close matchups there where they didn't, stick with what they were doing earlier in the year, and that just sent them down in the voters' eyes. Do you have any idea why it was so skewed in the voting?
Here are the things that I think came into play. One is that, especially back then, if there was one team that was considered to be better when the season started, man, it was impossible to get them to move, uh, aside from losing. So Penn State started the season at number 9. So they were considered a good team, but it's not like they were considered a serious national championship contender. Now Nebraska was. And Nebraska lost the national championship on a missed field goal at the Orange Bowl the season before. So they were preseason 1, 2, they were expected to make this run. So it's already planted in the voters' heads that Nebraska's a national championship caliber team. And that, man, this is, and again, you got to remember Tom Osborne had been coaching for a long time, since the early to mid 70s, and had no national championships, had a great career, but he kept losing big games. And so he was the sentimental favorite here. And the other thing that hurt Penn State is that Rose Bowl game. Now, they did pretty much all they could do. They won by 18, and actually that game was 38-13 in the fourth quarter. So they won it by more than that would indicate that final score. But Oregon wasn't regarded to be that good. They were 8-3. So they finished 8-4. So if they could have played somebody a little bit higher in the rankings in the Rose Bowl, that would have helped them too.
It really makes you appreciate the way that they have it today, where all of the best teams are guaranteed to at least match up against, one of the four other best teams in the playoff. It makes you appreciate how we've kind of consolidated the matchups a little bit.
Oh yeah, it's a much better system. There's no question about that. And then just to look at Nebraska, I don't remember any close calls. I'm sure they had them. They beat West Virginia, top 25 team by 31. UCLA was pretty good. They beat them by 28. I don't know that UCLA finished as strong as that would show, number 13 in the country at that point.
It looks like they didn't have a one-possession game.
No, they did not. So yeah, that back-to-back Indiana-Illinois run for Penn State really hurt them.
Yeah, that did them in.
And they're playing a Miami team. You gotta consider that from 1983. So it'd been a full decade that almost every year Miami's in the national championship race. So people really looked at that as just a monster of a game versus Penn State playing the Rose Bowl against Oregon.
Yeah. So if they win that, they're gonna get it basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That makes sense, Mark.
Yep. I don't like that outcome because Penn State did everything they possibly could, and I think they played roughly just as good a schedule. But again, it was more about the postseason game, and it was about Penn State struggling back. And when I say struggling, again, those scores were a little bit closer than the games actually were, but they didn't look good because neither of those teams were very good.
Competitive teams, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I needed to hear it from someone who wasn't looking through Nittany colored glasses. So I appreciate that.
Well, thanks for dropping by, Nathan.
No problem, man. I'm always by, and I'll drop by for some more calls more often. Okay.
Cool. Thanks, Nathan. Appreciate it. All right, Jackson, you ready to fire off on your thoughts?
I'm ready. I want to go over a little bit about the 1993 season.
Okay.
A little bit about 1990. Now, 1993, that was a pretty good year, but it was a great year for Auburn, but it was not so good in a way because they were banned from the postseason.
Yeah.
And we had that big game between Florida State and Notre Dame. Notre Dame winds up beating Florida State, and then they were caught celebrating a little too much by Boston College. So Boston College kind of showed them a thing or two, if you will. So, and I know that Florida State went up against Nebraska. Honestly, I never understood why, there's West Virginia, but I guess they considered the fact that West Virginia beat, the big bad Miami, and they considered the fact that they beat Boston College on Black Friday a little bit after Boston College upset Notre Dame. So, and West Virginia won the Big East, so they were unbeaten until they went up against Florida. Man, Charlie Ward was great that year in 1993.
Yes.
So, okay, so I see that Florida, I know they lost to Auburn and they lost to Florida State, but they won the SEC. So if it was like 2020s or 2010s, Florida would be in because they won the SEC that time.
So you're trying to figure out what a BCS or a college football playoff would be?
Yep. So it would probably be Florida State, Notre Dame, obviously in. Nebraska's obviously in. If Auburn wasn't banned from postseason play, then they would be in. But alas, we kind of have to choose between Florida and West Virginia. So I guess we put West Virginia in because they're not banned for postseason, and they're unbeaten at that point.
Yeah. If we're eliminating Auburn, then I think if this were today, we would have had an Ohio State Wisconsin Big Ten championship game, both of them 9-1-1, and that would have cleared up their tie during the regular season, for one thing.
Right.
Then we would have had, we would have had an interesting Florida. Do you have the results up there? Did Florida beat Tennessee?
Yes, they beat Tennessee.
Okay, so we would have had a Florida Auburn, or because Auburn was eliminated, we had a Florida Alabama SEC championship game, of course.
Right.
So that was played, and Florida won. We would have had an ACC championship game of what? Florida State and who in the world knows? Miami. Florida State and Miami playing in the ACC championship game.
Oh, Miami was in the Big East in 1993.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm talking about if we had this going on today.
Oh, my error. I'm thinking in like 1993 for some
Well,
reason.
you can look at it a few different ways.
Right.
If you could look at it as though if all those conferences had championship games then, or
Right.
if they were all thrown into their current conference, that's kind of what I was doing.
Right.
But the way things sit there, it's funny because you've got 2 undefeated teams and you've got all those 1-loss teams, and let's not forget Texas A&M sitting there at 10-1.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, I see that Tennessee lost to Florida, of course, and they tied Alabama that year. So there's that. I'm still amazed North Carolina was doing well at that time. Matt Brown in his first tenure.
Yeah, that's right at the point that he turned them around. I think his first year was 89.
Yep.
So, wow, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We've got 10 teams that have 0 or 1 loss.
Oh, yeah. Kind of like a Wild Wild West, so to speak.
And then you've got a 2-loss Florida team that won the SEC championship game. Wow.
Oh, yeah.
You've got 11 teams that you really need to consider for the playoff, or for the playoff.
Well, 12-team playoff back then would have made things a little bit easier for everybody. I think everybody would have been happier and nobody would be upset, but oh, wait, there's number 13. I forgot about number 13.
Well, shoot, I was saying that Ohio State and Wisconsin would have played in the Big Ten championship game. It would have been Ohio State and Nebraska.
That's for sure. But Michigan would have had the last laugh because that year, that was one of the many years that Michigan was dominating Ohio State in the John Cooper era.
Yes.
So,
but Ohio State would have still played in the Big Ten championship game.
True.
Yeah, against Nebraska.
I don't think it would have been pretty.
Yeah, Nebraska was certainly arguably the best team in the country, arguably.
Oh, man, they were one of the best.
But I'm landing with Notre Dame and Auburn there. And again, I would like to look into the Auburn violations, which I was aware of at the time, but it's been so long, I don't remember what that was all about.
Oh, man, like violations. I mean, I remember reading about it few years back about how it was so bad that they couldn't be able to air the games on television, where they couldn't air games on ABC, ESPN, CBS. They
Yeah.
can only air it on like a closed circuit television, or you could listen to it on the radio.
Oh, okay. This is coming back to light. August of 93, Auburn was hit with some of the most severe penalties in the history of the NCAA. That was a direct result of a former Auburn scholarship football player, Eric Ramsey, secretly taping 4 years' worth of conversations in which Auburn coaches and supporters provided illegal cash and gifts.
Ooh,
He taped the phone conversations.
wow.
Huh.
Not smart.
Yeah, I don't know what he benefited from that.
I wonder what it was, but I'll definitely have to read about it again before I go to bed tonight. Old Fort saying reminiscent of 80s SMU.
Yep. All right, Jackson. Anything else you wanted to hit on?
A little bit about the 1990 season.
Okay.
About Clemson, Colorado and Georgia Tech. Like, oh man, that was a big one. And you were talking a little while ago about Miami, about how they were really good then. It was, I think if they hadn't been upset by BYU and they hadn't lost to, I believe they lost to Notre Dame that year.
Yep.
They would be up there at number one, number two, fighting for a second straight natty.
Yeah, college football was just begging for one of its top teams to not have dropped some of those games because, as you can see, Georgia Tech, with no losses, still wasn't convincing anyone, too many teams, that they really, really earned that.
Man, that Miami shellacking over Texas, where in the Cotton Bowl, that was pretty funny, man. Like, yeah, the funniest one was the TD celebration where one of the guys scored a touchdown. He runs into the sideline, right? And then he's like a little gunfighter. I'm like,
yeah, that was either Randall Hill or I believe that was Randall Hill. Maybe it was Lamar Thomas, but I think it was Randall Hill. Yeah, he just kept going. They were just making a mockery of the rule book. They racked up like 250 yards and penalties. They just didn't care, and it didn't matter.
oh man. I hope I see a touchdown celebration like that again this year. Where it's like somebody just runs into the sidelines and then acts like they're a gunfighter from a Western. That's my favorite one of all time. But man, that Colorado 5th down game against Missouri, holy cow. I mean,
Yeah. Again, man, Colorado, to many people, lost 3 games that year because that would have been a second. Then the Notre Dame Orange Bowl game would have been a third. And wow, it's a tough call for me to make because Georgia Tech was just so flimsy for an undefeated team.
right. Well, I do have a little solution for that.
Okay.
Have Colorado, Georgia Tech play each other.
Well, I thought you had a solution for right now.
Oh, for right now. Well, in that case, Clemson, Georgia Tech, and Texas, Miami. I don't think I'd want to be in the room for Miami, Colorado. Oof. Honestly, they would have been a 4 seed. Miami would have been one of those 4 seeds that would possibly won it all. I mean, they were acting like, if they were playing like how they played against Texas in the Cotton Bowl, oh man, I would have not been in the room against Colorado for sure.
Yeah, if you take the teams for where they were playing in the conferences at the time, I guess those top 4, they were all conference. Well, no, Georgia Tech would have been the ACC champion. So forget Florida State; they're out. Washington would have been the other team involved. Yeah, well, I'm looking at the final. Let me look at the second to last. All right, there we go. Your 14 playoff. Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's those top four, although yeah, Notre Dame beat Miami.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing it would have been Colorado, Georgia Tech, Texas, and Notre Dame would have played in the
Yeah,
playoff.
you're right. I forgot about the head-to-head for a moment. So
There is a crazy run of teams right there. You've got Washington. They won the Pac-12s or the Pac-10. So yeah, that would have been a mess.
oof. Oh man, think of like the endless campaigns that would have happened. I mean, Lou Holtz, Dennis Erickson, Bobby Bowden, Joe Paterno, Don James just lining up for campaigns on CBS, ESPN, ABC, listing why their team should be in the playoff. Like if we had a 14 playoff in 1990, holy cow.
I don't know how to sort through all that. Penn State's there at number 7, and they weren't even the Big Ten champion. Well, this is 1990. They weren't even in the Big Ten at the time. So they're an independent. You got so many independents playing in this, and Michigan's not even on the board. They're 9-2, and they were the Big Ten champion. Wow. Those top 3 would have been in the playoff, and then the other spot would have just been, I think, either Notre Dame beat Penn State or Penn State beat Notre Dame. I think they played that year. So that's another game to consider.
19. Oh yeah. Penn State played at Notre Dame that year. I believe that was like a snowball, right?
Yeah, that's coming back here. Yes, Penn State and Notre Dame. Can I get a final score on that? Let's see. We had Notre Dame won 17-16. So Notre Dame's got the tiebreaker on Miami and on Penn State. But that Notre Dame team, they lost to Notre Dame lost to Stanford by 17. And they, wait a minute. That's not right. 1992. Yeah. Why do they have?
Oh man, Dennis Green upset Notre Dame
9-2. I'm missing something there. They have Notre Dame at 9-2, and Notre Dame 1992 Notre Dame schedule. They've got a tie against Michigan.
Oh man.
Oh, 1990. I keep thinking we're in 92. 1990 Notre Dame lost to Stanford, and they lost to Penn State 24-21 in 1990.
Right.
So Penn State's got the tiebreaker there.
Right. But Texas definitely has a little tiebreaker ahead Penn State because they got that little victory over Penn State.
Well, yeah, I'm not even thinking that Texas needs a tiebreaker. They're 10-1. I'm looking at all those 9-2 teams.
Yeah. So Notre Dame's got the little head-to-head over Miami. Florida State, they lost to Miami and Auburn. Oh, man.
Yeah, that's a mess that involves a lot more than what I'm willing to go through right now to try to determine who would be in a 4-team playoff, for sure.
Well, I guess we do like a little rock, paper, scissors of Miami and Notre Dame.
Well, why is Miami included?
Good point. They shouldn't have lost BYU, and they shouldn't have lost Notre Dame. So you gotta go, Miami.
I'm thinking it's coming down to Notre Dame and Penn State and Michigan.
Ooh.
And I guess either Tennessee or Florida are 9-2. And Washington's 9-2. All those teams have to be considered.
for sure. Mm.
All right, Jackson. Anything else?
That's about all. Thank you for having me on, Mark.
Of course, Jackson. Have a good one.
You too.
We will keep it moving here at the Voice of College Football. We appreciate our buddy Terrence stopping by. What if Ohio State made that field goal? Let's see. We're discussing 1990 to 1997, the field goal. What field goal did they miss? I know that they missed a lot of them. We can go through every Ohio State missed field goal between 1990 and 97. None are coming to mind that were that crucial. Let me think. Now, in 1990, they chose not to kick a field goal against Michigan, which would have tied the game against Michigan, but they were playing for a Big Ten championship and trip to the Rose Bowl, so they went for it on fourth down. Tim, I hope you're getting the sarcasm. I hope. We're talking about 1990 to 97. So again, 1990, they could have kicked a field goal against Michigan and tied Michigan, but that would have not helped. So, Terrence, if Ohio State would have made that field goal, yes, I guess you're talking about the 1990 game where they could have kicked the field goal against Michigan. Got it. All right. Buckeye Mike's here. Welcome to the Voice of College Football.
How you doing, Mark?
I am doing just fine, Mike. We're searching for an Ohio State missed field goal between 1990 and 97.
Oh, there's so many.
So what's on your mind?
So I was kind of running through the polls earlier, and I think the biggest one that sticks out to me is the one that everybody talks about, is 97.
Yes.
And I know there was one, it was either 90 like we're looking at now, or I think it was 91, but definitely 97 comes to mind for me.
Yes.
But I guess, is there any way they could have had the matchup between Nebraska and Michigan? I mean, I know and I understand the tiebreakers, but wasn't there another Big Ten team that they could have sent to the Rose Bowl just to have those two play each other?
Well, sure. They could have done what they did after that in the BCS, but that wasn't the structure. Those weren't the rules. Those weren't the contracts. That's
True.
not what was determined. The Big Ten champion played in the Rose Bowl. Now, later, they determined, well, if the Big Ten champion has the ability to move on and has been voted at a place landing in the BCS where they go on to a BCS championship game, then the Rose Bowl gets the second place team. But that wasn't the contract. And they would have violated a contract, and the Rose Bowl could have sued them. So, no. So, not really. That's the whole issue.
That it is. So do you think that because we're looking at 1990 right now, right?
Yes, we are.
Do you think that Colorado was deserving of it? Do you think that they were the right option, or
this is such a tough call because Georgia Tech, if we're just going strictly by record, they should be the national champion by themselves. They did not lose a game.
Mm-hmm.
Georgia Tech played a weak schedule in a weak conference. Okay, Colorado, based on what we're looking at right there, technically went 11-1-1, but even that was flawed by a questionable call in the Orange Bowl. But let's even put that aside, this fifth down ridiculousness against Missouri. So However, if you go through the play-by-play, and it's been a while since I've done this, but I did this a couple of years ago. Shoot, it's probably been about 5 years ago because I produced a video. If you go through the officials' mistakes in that fifth down situation, the
Mhm.
one disclaimer on the side of Colorado is that they would have known on fourth down that it was fourth down. They would have known on third down. I think I forget which down they screwed up and failed to flip the marker. Might have been between like second and third down. And Colorado would have treated that play differently. But yes, they scored on a fifth down to win a game. So
Mhm.
that's kind of screwed up.
Do you personally think that there's anyone in this time frame, in your eyes, that
Yep.
doesn't deserve to be champion, or there's questions? Like, I know that's why you started this whole thing, but in your opinion, what do you think it is?
Oh, well, I'm naming who, in my eyes, is the champion at each one of these years. So for me, um, it's more about elevating other teams. So in 1997, Michigan and Nebraska are the champions. In 1996, Florida won the AP and the coaches poll championship, but Florida State and Ohio State had resumes that were almost identical. So to me, Florida State and Ohio State deserve a national championship just as much as Florida does. So it's so far going through the 90s, the only team that I've stripped a national championship from is 1993 Florida State.
Okay. What do you think is the arguments for Florida State and Ohio State for the Florida year?
Florida State and Florida split 2 games. That's
Oh,
Florida State's argument.
That's the year they played again in the Sugar Bowl, isn't it?
Yes. And Ohio State's argument is that they beat the number 1 team in the country in the Rose Bowl, and all 3 teams finished with 1 loss, and they were all conference champions. And 2 of them played each other, and they split. The other one did not play anyone. Therefore, the other reasoning would be you include Arizona State in the argument, but Arizona State played Ohio State and lost.
That makes sense.
So people are asking who the team of the 90s was, and man, that's a great
That's a good
debate between, to me, it's a Nebraska Florida State argument with Miami getting some consideration, but I think it's mostly Nebraska and Florida State.
I personally would go with Nebraska just because of how dominant they were with Osborne, and then the Tommy Frazier years. Those were really good.
Yep, that's certainly valid. Yeah, I would tend to lean Nebraska.
I just think, I don't know. I think the Big 12 in the 90s was definitely, or whatever it was in the 90s, I think it was still the Big 12, was definitely a lot stronger than what it is today, for sure.
Oh yeah, it was the top conference. It was pretty well loaded for most of those years. Yeah, because Nebraska was Nebraska, and you had Oklahoma and Texas included, and yeah. once it well, it was two different conferences. So in 1996, of course, they swallowed up the Southwest Conference, and it became a much stronger league. All right, Mike, anything else?
Not that I can think of based on the topic tonight, but thank you for having me on, and hopefully next time I'll be more prepared.
I appreciate it, Buckeye Mike. Thanks for being here. Have a good night.
You too.
All right, we will keep it moving here at the Voice of College Football. I want to remind everyone, the Amazon link is in the description section of all the videos. When you shop Amazon, please use the link that we provide. Christopher, what's going on tonight?
Hey, Mark.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, good. Oh, I was going to get your opinion, I guess, on a couple things, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
okay?
I would love to
Okay.
hear your take on all of this as we go through the 1990s.
I actually went to the Orange Bowl, the one that you seem to think that Colorado lost. I was at that game.
Whoa, 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 whoa. I did not say that they lost. I said that there is a questionable call.
Well, yeah, and I was there, actually. I got a good view of it because I was in the backside of the end zone where it looked to me like Colorado had lost the game, is what it looked like at the time. And what they did was they had a official review, I guess, or something to where clipping penalty, I guess, that I didn't notice. And I, in all fairness to people that have objections, I didn't notice a clip at all. Not that I was in a position where I could have seen or done anything about it, but I only noticed it when I went home and looked at the replay. And even then, it's questionable about whether or not the person that was clipped could have even, because Rocket was making, whether he could have even done anything, but he was clipped. So, I mean, I think he even had somebody today that at least said that if they don't honor that, I guess that's not a good precedent. Am I wrong about that? I thought
I'm
you told
sorry.
somebody.
Say that again?
Oh, didn't you have a Big Ten show or something where one of your panelists said something about if they didn't honor that penalty, that wouldn't be a good precedent for wasn't whether or not there was a clip. It was more about whether that was in other words, to not, use that as it's not the right way, I guess, to decide the outcome, because I think there was a clip on the play is kind of what I'm trying to tell you. Whether or not it could have stopped the play from being a touchdown, that's the only question, but he was clipped was the only thing. I mean, blocked from behind or hit from behind. I mean, it was a clip. But the question, I guess, becomes whether or not that person could have actually impacted the play in a way that could have prevented the touchdown. That's what the big question is, I think. Are you there?
Yep, I'm listening.
Okay. Well, anyway, so I don't, I thought Colorado lost the game because I was there. I saw the good angle, and it looked like, Rocket scored. It looked like the Colorado lost the game, and when he didn't, it was actually kind of a surprise to almost everybody there. So, I mean, I was at the game, so people were surprised about it. So, I mean, it's always kind of been an asterisk, even without the other play that you're talking about. And the other one, I kind of think, just from my opinion, and I wasn't at that one, but I noticed looking again on replay, there was a play, if you want to watch it, you might not want to, but where it looked like if the player hadn't slipped and fallen, and he fell on the ground, so once your knee hits the ground, then it's a down, and he wasn't out of bounds. But it looked like he could have scored, is what I'm trying to tell you. And so whether he could have or not, obviously, it's kind of like the Rocket Ismail thing. It's like, well, he didn't score, so he can't really count it. But at the same time, he probably wasn't just going to fall where he was, though. So, I mean, it's kind of, we have another variable that we aren't really giving credit for, I don't think, because he wasn't going to just fall like he did, and he wasn't probably going to just quit either. So he was either going to score or going out of bounds. So, and what he ended up doing was falling on the ground. And so what they had to do was spike the football to stop the clock.
Well, I understand, but that's part of football. You got to stay on your feet.
Well, yeah.
You can't fall down playing football.
I agree with you, but it was, the surface itself was, I think it's called OmniTurf or something. It wasn't, I mean, and I know it's the same for both teams, and I know but it, I mean, it impacted the game is what I'm trying to tell you. I mean, whether or not it maybe changed the outcome, I guess you could maybe make that argument that it didn't, but Colorado isn't going to spike the football, though, is kind of what I'm trying to tell you. If it was even a reasonable surface, they're going to either, they wouldn't have had to, I guess. I mean, he would have either gotten out of bounds or would have scored a touchdown. I mean, and if you watch that play, I think his name was John Perrick, and you can watch the play and make up your own mind about it, and that's okay with me. But he couldn't do either one because he slipped. I mean, that's just a fact,
Okay. Here's my thought on that, Chris. I have no issue with a Colorado fan who wants to say, man, that was bad luck. Our player was in the open field and could have
I
scored
mean,
a
he caught the
touchdown, but he
football.
slipped.
I don't know if it's bad luck. He caught the football. He just wasn't able to. He couldn't. He slipped and fell. I mean,
Okay.
without even being touched.
Okay.
I mean, how common is that, Mark? Come on. I mean, nobody tackled him. He didn't. He didn't trip.
If
He
we
slipped.
are going to rewrite history on everybody who slips and falls, then we've got, man, we're going to be here like endlessly with an endless live stream trying to determine who would have slipped and fell that changed a game.
I'm not saying it changed anything.
That's
I'm
part of
just
the
saying-
game.
I'm not saying it changed anything. I'm just saying he slipped and fell.
Okay.
You know, a normal surface, I'm sure that's probably not what he's going to. So it impacted that play. At the very least, it impacted that play. You know, and he was real close to the sideline, so he almost got out of bounds anyway, but he couldn't because he by the time he hit the ground, it was, you know, his knee hit the ground. Or like I said, you can review it and make up your own mind what you think.
It's an interesting side note. I don't mind you mentioning it. I just don't want to, me personally, I'm not going to put myself in a position to change the outcome of a game or determine something different because somebody slipped.
Well, that's what happened though. I mean, I'm just trying to tell you. He caught the
understand that,
football
but that's
by the
part of
sideline.
football.
By the
That's part of
sideline,
the
where
game.
he's either going
You
to
gotta
try
stay on
to
your feet.
score or he's going to, and maybe he doesn't score. I'm not even saying he does. I'm saying maybe he doesn't. Maybe he gets, maybe that's the end of the game right there. I don't know. The fact was he slipped and fell. And what they had to do, because he didn't get out of bounds, they had to, you know, they had to waste a down is what they had to do. So it did cost him a down. But whether or not it impacted the result, I don't know. But anyway, I kind of think it's important to kind of keep that in mind, though, because it's almost like you're saying Colorado cheated, and that's not the impression I had.
When did I ever say Colorado cheated?
Well, I'm not saying
it has nothing to do with Colorado. I've stated a million times, anytime that there's a team in college football or any sport that benefited from a call, they have nothing to do with it. The officials make the calls. They're not out there playing pickup basketball where they're making their own calls. They have nothing to do with it.
Well, what it was is I think he spiked the football, and this is the way I remember it. Maybe I remember it wrong. I don't know because my memory isn't the greatest. But yeah, he spiked the ball on first down. You know, that probably wasn't even the smartest thing to do, really, but he did. So that's where they lost the down, really, was at the first down, not the fourth down. And then I think they ran a ball that didn't quite get in the end zone, and so they had to spike it again. And then they didn't score on fourth down. So that's when, you know, that was kind of where it should have ended, I guess, but they spiked it on fifth down. Or no, I'm sorry. I'm doing something wrong here, but he spiked it on fourth down instead of, so they did kind of get a first down there, what they didn't deserve. But, you know, I think he did actually, if it was fifth down, I don't know, but I think they said he scored though, whether it was first down or fifth down or whatever it was. I mean, he actually did score at he leaned, what it was is at least they said he did. I mean, they said there was some question about whether he even scored even on that down, but I don't think that they would have said he did if he didn't. But
okay.
Anyway, I don't know. I just, I'm not going to take that away from Colorado because they fought so hard to get even in that position that it's like, I think it's kind of like splitting hairs. You know, okay, yeah, it took another down. Well, to me, it's like, you know,
that was the down that won the game, though. And here's the thing, that even though Colorado spiked the ball based on what they were reading on the down marker,
yeah,
they would have had to spike the ball anyway. They had to spike the ball because of the time. They didn't have enough time.
They didn't have any time. Yeah.
Yeah, they spiked the ball on after the third down play. They spiked the ball thinking it's now going to be fourth down because there's only 2 seconds left, when in fact they really spiked the ball on fourth down.
Right. No, I agree. That's exactly what happened. I'm not even saying that's not what happened, but the down marker didn't say fourth down though. It said third.
Sure. Yes,
okay.
It wasn't their fault.
Well, I mean, at some point, I don't know who do you point the finger at? You pointed at Colorado because they looked at the down marker and it was wrong. I mean, I don't know.
You pointed at the officials.
Well,
because they made the mistake.
At any rate, I don't feel too bad about it. I think Missouri had every chance to win the game, even with that happening against them and all that, and they still almost did. So, I mean, I guess tip your hat to them and all that. But, you know, that was a tough win for Colorado, I think, going in there and beating Missouri and Columbia. And if you want to make it to where they didn't win it, I guess that's okay. But that's not the way I look at it. But, you know, I'm just trying to base it on what I remember, though. You know, I don't know that it's fair to say that they didn't win. I think they actually did win, but so that's kind of where I have a difference with you. But I guess,
of course, officially they have a win in the book. but they had to,
don't give it a loss. Then don't say they're 9-3.
they had to be given a down. They had to be given an extra play that they didn't earn.
Well,
That
I don't
the
know if
game's not played with 5 downs.
if it says 4th down on the sidelines, I don't know that he's
I
going to.
understand it's not their fault, but they also wouldn't have had time to run the play anyway. So they
Right.
did have to spike the ball
Oh,
to
I know.
stop the
Time
clock.
they barely got that. Even the spike was kind of questionable about whether he got the spike out on time. It was real close. I mean, it was like within a second. I mean, it was as close as you can get.
That Missouri team went 4-7.
Right. Yeah, they weren't the greatest Missouri team.
No.
But, well, I mean, I don't
They
know, Mark. I mean, Missouri though. I mean, come on. I mean, you have to beat Missouri. You have to be pretty good. I mean, that's
Not in this particular season. You didn't.
well. I mean, I don't know, Mark. I mean, you can if you want to draw the line as like super high. I guess you can try to do that. I
Well,
guess.
yeah, we're talking about a national championship. The bar is rather high.
Well, then you want to give one to Miami for beating Texas. Well, Colorado beat Texas. I mean, what's the difference?
No, do not put
Yeah.
words in my mouth.
Well, what are you basing it on if it's not on
I
big?
said that I believe that Miami was the best team in America in 1990. I never said about awarding them a national championship. Never said anything like that. I just said that's my personal opinion. I believe they were the best team in America. I never said that I was going to award them a national championship.
Then I can come back at you and say, well, then if that's true, then I guess BYU should get another title then. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if head to head is what matters. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I just kind of, there's a little bit of double standard, I think, going on there a little bit.
No, there's not a double standard. You were confusing our exercise here and going through and reviewing these seasons with me just saying I've got a personal opinion that I believe Miami was the best team in America that year. That has nothing to do with what we're doing here.
You know, I'm not pushing BYU as a national champion because they got routed by Texas A&M. So, I mean, I wouldn't even like mention it. And the record was about the same. I think they both had 2 losses. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you want to like put one above the other, I guess you can. That's fine. But you know, BYU got beat real bad by Texas A&M. That's just a fact. 65-14. It wasn't even a game. It wasn't even a game. I mean, I think the whole game was dominated. It was Texas A&M was pretty good, but they were 8-4. I think they weren't bad. They were a good team. But I don't know. I mean, I guess it kind of depends on where you want to draw that line is what I'm thinking. But it's like if you want to give it to Miami, I don't know how you can take it away from Colorado is what I'm trying to say.
I'm not giving anything to Miami. You are not understanding that the exercise we are doing here has nothing to do with the comment that I made that I believe Miami was the best team in 1990.
Well, what's the difference? I mean, they both beat Texas. And
there's a huge difference.
I don't know.
Here's the difference. Here's just one example. I could use about 50. Do I believe that TCU should have been selected for the college football playoff this last year? Yes. Do I believe that TCU was one of the 4 best teams in the country? No. That's a difference.
I understand that.
And that's what I'm applying to this season.
And I don't even know that I disagree with you on some of that. I actually kind of halfway agree with you. I did kind of for fun. I went back and just to see what they finished at, and I think I actually have TCU finishing 6th after losing to Georgia. I mean, they dropped quite a bit, but
yeah.
But even in 6th, I mean, that's, you know, you got to kind of tip your hat a little bit to them. I don't know.
Sure.
There's somebody famous hero or something saying bloodbath or something. Well, to get in a bloodbath, you have to be in the bath. That's kind of the way I look at it.
Yes,
you know, if he wants to make it a bloodbath, well, maybe it is, but at least they were in the bath. Nobody else was. So, I mean, I don't know. I kind of wonder how fair it is to like throw daggers at them just because they got beat so bad. But if you want to do it, I guess that's okay. I mean, go ahead and do it. It's fine. It's what happened. So I'm more inclined to give them credit for what they did to even be there, but I don't know exactly what went wrong, but you know, Georgia was a much better team is the way I look at it. You know, it just means that Georgia deserved the championship. That's all I really get from it.
They sure did.
Well, I mean, and that's what they deserve. I mean, I don't know if that's really a slam on Texas Christian though. I mean, if it is, I don't really understand why. It's disappointing to see that they didn't play a little bit better in the championship game, but Super Bowls are sometimes that way. I remember before Denver finally won one, it looked like everyone was getting worse. They were kind of a question about whether they would get routed by Green Bay, I remember, and they finally beat them. So I just don't know how fair it is to throw somebody under the bus for being in the title game.
I don't know that we're throwing them under the bus. We're basically just stating the obvious that TCU got slaughtered in the national championship game.
Sure. Well, although, you know, they put up a fight, though. I mean, I don't know, Mark. I think
They
sometimes
put
when
up a
teams,
fight.
when momentum gets rolling, and especially in the games like football, sometimes it's hard to stop that. You know, when it starts getting kind of going that direction, it's really actually kind of hard to get that momentum back here going your way again. But I'm not trying to sugarcoat it. I mean, they got beat real bad. That's why they finished 6th. I think if they'd have played a better game, they probably wouldn't have finished 6th.
We could go week to week through the schedule last year and find few games in all of college football that ended 65-7.
Well,
That were
okay.
58-point games.
So Tennessee should have been there, but it doesn't matter if they get routed by South Carolina. Well, we'll ignore that. You know, that doesn't really matter. It's only if TCU loses that we're going to make a note of it, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's kind of what I mean. It's like we need to put Tennessee in there instead of TCU, even though they got routed by South Carolina. We're not going to really be fair to either team. We're just going to. I mean, that's kind of the way I look at it. Am I wrong?
I don't know where you went with that Tennessee comment. You're telling me that the certain people believe that Tennessee should have been in the playoff.
The real MVP.
Yeah, he's basically saying if you look at the schedule that Tennessee plays and the games that they won, that he believes they were a better team.
Okay, well, he's entitled to that opinion.
Sure.
I don't really have an issue with it.
But TCU had a better record, and so I have no issue with them being selected for the playoff.
You know, I almost kind of do because I kind of think that they should limit it to conference champions. So I think if you want to make it about whether they deserve to go, I'm not sure that they really did.
Okay. So you would have had who in the playoff last year?
I don't know because I don't really make those decisions, but I think it was I don't know.
You just gave us a criteria of
I'm not
your
putting
decision-making process.
I'm not putting Kansas State in there, but you know, it's kind of looking at it from an objective perspective. I guess maybe Alabama maybe gets in. I don't know.
Oh, you just said that you had to win a conference championship to get to the playoff.
Okay, well then they don't.
then Alabama's not. Then you just told us who you think should have been in the playoff because you eliminated Kansas State, so it would have been Georgia, Clemson, Michigan, and USC in the playoff.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't make those decisions. So, I mean, you can put it on me if you want, but I mean, I don't know that I would put either one of those teams in there, Clemson. I mean, I don't know. Maybe.
Okay. All right.
Well, there was one more thing, if you don't mind, or do you
Sure.
not want to? Well, you know, again, you may think and I'm sure Tim probably thinks I'm doing this, but you said USC was a national champion in 1978, but they lost to Arizona State.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think BYU in 1996 has a similar situation.
Oh, Lord.
I know you don't agree with that, but
No, I don't.
well, I think you got to kind of give credit where credit belongs, though. Do you think that them beating Kansas State, that wasn't a very quality win or even close to one? Cotton Bowl?
So the issue with BYU in 1996 is just similar to what we're seeing now with the current group of 5. They just didn't play the type of schedule that warrants them being considered.
In your opinion? You didn't think Wyoming was any good?
It's well beyond my opinion. They played in the mountain, they played in the WAC at the time, of course. Yeah. So Chris, just to give you kind of a broad structure, and then we're going to move on of how at least I'm addressing this. I'm not saying that this is the only way you can do it, and this is right, and everybody else is wrong, but I have only considered group of 5 teams when they have had a better record than their Power 5 counterparts because their schedules aren't comparable.
Well, what about Texas Christian in 2010? They beat Wisconsin. I mean, come on. I mean, how much better did they have to be to be fair? I mean, come on.
But there's a difference between playing one game and playing 10 games like that. It wasn't
just one game. I mean, they beat Utah. I don't remember. It's been long enough. They beat Oregon State. Oregon State was pretty good. They weren't terrible. They were pretty good.
Yeah. Had Auburn had a loss and won the BCS championship, then I would have placed TCU as a champion as well.
Okay. Well, at least you're trying to be fair, I guess. I don't know.
Well, that's what I did other years. That's what I did in 2000. in other years here with Utah, for example, in 2008 with Utah, you had Florida, Texas, and USC all with one loss, but you had Utah undefeated, having beaten Alabama, and I'm awarding Utah with a share of the championship.
Well, they kind of have one anyway. I mean, you don't really have to do anything.
They do?
Well, not exactly. I think the computer part of the BCS, which is 1/3, I mean, it's not the BCS, but they finished first in the computer poll, the composite computer poll, which is 1/3 of the B. So it's like they have kind of 1/3 of the BCS, even without being in the BCS. I don't know if you knew that. They finished first in the BCS, the computer
No,
poll.
I was not aware of that. The formula portion of the BCS. Gotcha.
Yeah, the computer part, 1/3 is 1/3. Yeah, they finished first in that. I don't know what they finished in the other part. I don't know if that was, I mean, the other part's kind of what made the champion,
but you're talking about that formula came out after they played the Sugar Bowl.
Yeah, it was afterwards.
Yeah. And at that point, the formula's not even taken into consideration because the game's already been determined. So those two teams are playing.
I think they finished second in like the AP is what I remember.
All right, Chris. Well, I'm going to keep it moving here and take some other calls.
All right. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Chris. Have a good night.
Bye.
All right. We will keep it moving here at the Voice of College Football. We got Will on the line. You with us, Will?
Hello.
Hey, Will.
Sorry, I was with some of my friends.
No, you're good. How are the friends going? They good?
Good.
All right. Do they like college football?
They're casuals. Like I try to get them into it.
Okay.
They watch the big games. But so I think that what do you think? Is this a bad take? You think that the 1990 Notre Dame team has the best running back room ever in college football? I mean, I think it's pretty stacked.
Wow. Let me revisit that one.
Yeah.
The greatest running back room ever.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Jerome Bettis, Tony Brooks, Rodney Culver. Yeah.
God rest his soul.
Oh, and Ricky Waters. If you want to switch him, they got him listed here as a wide receiver. Obviously, he was a running back.
Mm-hmm. Dorsey Levens. Before he transferred.
Levens. Before he went to Georgia Tech.
Yeah, before he went to Georgia Tech. Both of the Brooks brothers.
In terms of depth, combining obviously quality, but also depth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that we would be hard pressed to find, what is that, 5 backs that good. Although I think on the same roster in 1990, you had Robert Smith, Raymond Harris, Carlos Snow, Scotty Graham, Jeff Cothran. They all played in the NFL, and Raymond Harris was a 1,000-yard back in the NFL, and obviously Robert Smith was a Pro Bowler. Now, none of those guys were Jerome Bettis, although Robert Smith in his prime was in that.
It's just a shame that Gary Darnell was the defensive coordinator of this Notre Dame team because they should have not lost to Penn State and Stanford, but they did. And, yeah, but it is what it is. Can't change history.
No, and I don't know if you saw when we lined up everybody in 1990, but man, it would have been a heck of a playoff.
Oh yeah,
to make.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
You had 1,000,009-2 teams.
I feel like I feel like Notre Dame would have won, but then again, the defensive play calling was bad. But I mean, the offensive talent was so good on that team. So, but who knows?
Yeah, Derek Brown was a really good tight end. Lake Dawson.
Dawson, yeah.
Bringing some names back here. Wow. And of course, Rick Meyer not winning the first of his 3 Heismans.
That
was Ron Paulus. That was Ron Paulus. Yes.
Ron Paulus is pretty hated by Notre Dame fans because of his job that he's done as the director of football operations as well. That really hasn't helped it much, but he's still there. He's still there for now. I feel like the 92 team was more talented than the 93 team. Because Gary Darnell was out back then. They had Rick Minter as the DC then. I feel like the 92 team was more talented, but for some reason they really put it together more in 93. I mean, they tied a strong Michigan team that year. And when they finally won the Rose Bowl.
Yep.
But they lost to Stanford again. I don't know. It's with Notre Dame losing to Stanford. I don't know, man.
Oh, this was the introduction of Derek Mays and Mark Edwards. Yeah, Aaron Taylor at tackle, Ray Zellers. Oh
Mhm.
man, yeah. Bobby Taylor was a heck of a cornerback, and Ronaldo Wynn at D end. Brian Young, of course, was a great NFL player.
Hall of Famer. Yeah, man. I remember watching like one of those a Michigan game back in the day, and then Bobby Taylor just tattooed John Collins, man.
Todd Collins?
Todd, yeah.
Yes. So what happened to Notre Dame recruiting after Lou Holtz left? Man, these teams were loaded.
I don't know. Maybe it was just the academic restrictions. Because I feel like I heard like Davey made Lou retire because like he was saying Lou wasn't really caring about the academic. He was like kind of not all in on the academics. I think that was part of what happened.
Sean, by the way, when we get you on the phone, you can explain to me about Utah winning the Pac-12. I don't know what that note means. Anyway.
93 would have been a fun playoff too.
Oh, yeah, it would have been.
Do you think Ohio State could have gotten into 93?
93, let's go ahead to 93 because I don't think so. Yeah, let's look at 93. What I think would have been selected would have been. All right, this is 93. Did that move it ahead to 93 or is that still 92? That's 93.
Yeah, that's 93.
Okay. I don't see how you get around. Okay, if we eliminate Auburn, I don't know how you get around undefeated major conference teams. So Nebraska and West Virginia are in, and Florida State's. Yeah. I don't know how you get around those top four, but it is a mess if you objectively look at it because you really should be considering. Wait a minute. This is 93 in Florida. That's right. They beat Tennessee head to head. So they knocked them out, and Florida won the SEC. You know, if this is today, the way the SEC is respected, and Florida's sitting there at 10-2, they'd even get some consideration. But yeah, I don't know how you distinguish Ohio State and Wisconsin because they tied on the field and they have the same record.
92 would have probably been Bama, Miami. Would have Michigan gotten into 92 and Notre Dame?
Yes, I actually have mapped all this out. I don't have it in front of me. Actually, I could pull it up. I do have it on my laptop here. I've mapped out the 4 teams and the 12 in terms of the way I think it would have been selected. Yeah, well, you just said Notre Dame in 92 or Michigan. Look at Texas A&M at 12-0.
Oh, I didn't know they were 12-0 before we played them in that bowl game.
Wow.
Yeah.
So shoot. Yeah. And that was I'm mixing up the years. That was the year that Notre Dame just clocked them 28-3.
Yep.
Yeah, it was the next year. It was a close game, 24-21. Okay. Yeah, that playoff would have been, I guess it would have had to been Miami, Alabama, Florida State, and Texas. Although It would have to have been Miami, Alabama, Texas A&M, Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it should have been.
Do you think that Miami was the better team in 92? No, 90 than Notre Dame, even though Notre Dame won by 2 scores.
Well, that is a great call on your part. And that Notre Dame team lost to Penn State and Stanford, correct?
Yeah, I freaking Gary Darnell.
Yeah. No, you've got a great argument there. I've always held that Miami, I thought, was the best team in 1990. But you've definitely got an argument. They won by 2 scores. That game was at Notre Dame, correct?
Yeah, that was in South Bend. So there's a point to Miami's favor. Oh my gosh. But Notre Dame did. Gary Darnell was the DC at Texas in 95 and 96, lose last 2 years, and the Irish beat him both times, at least. So that was sort of revenge, but
Yeah, and again, to your point, the some of those seasons, just man, they would have been a mess with a 14 playoff. They would have been fun. It would have been just, you talk about arguing. We could have argued for days.
yeah. I just wish we could have seen some of those Lou teams face those Tom Osborne teams, especially in 93, 92.
Yeah, that's a game that we never saw.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been fun to see instead of Nebraska
Yeah.
continuing to play Miami and Florida State. To see them play Notre Dame would have been great. We might have lost Will. Will, you still with us?
I'm here. Sorry.
Okay. No, you're good. Anything else?
That's about it. I just want to talk Notre Dame, and then, I mean, we could talk about the late 80s next time, too.
We are going to talk the 80s. Yes, we
Yeah.
will. That's the next one. Thanks, Will. Have a good
Thanks,
night.
Mark. See ya.
We'll keep it moving here. We got Sean on the line. Sean, how you doing?
Good, Mark. Good.
What's going on tonight? Hopefully we can clear up your connection, Sean. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Hey, Sean, unfortunately,
Hello?
we cannot hear you. Well, we'll give it another try here. You with us, Sean? Hello, Sean. Hey, Sean, you've been waiting a long time. I'm sorry, but we can't hear you. Sean, if you would just give us a call back, give that another shot. We'll keep it moving here, the voice of college football. And then, Beverly, thank you so much for the super chats. I will answer those questions. Give me just a second. Let's go to David first. David.
Oh, yes. By the way, I hope you got a good cardio session on Saturday, Mark. You're looking good, man.
We're doing our best. We hit the upper body today down at the gym.
There you go. There you go. Good stuff, man.
And then I compare myself to my friends and they tell me how much weight they're lifting. And I'm like, no. That's those years have gone by. I'm not concerned with how much weight's on the bar. Nope.
Treadmill's just where you want to be then, right, Mark?
Well, no, I'm not a treadmill guy. I haven't touched a treadmill in a long time. So I lift a lot of weights. I just don't lift much weight.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. All right. Well, you're in my wheelhouse, which is 1990s college football here, which is just what could have been era of Ohio State football if By the way, I saw you on the Buckeye Talk today bringing up the most excruciating losses. A 1998 Michigan State will always hold a special place, and wow,
you would change that game.
Yeah, well, it's a tie. It's a tie. It's between and it's 2 Cooper losses. It's 1996 when Sean Springs slipped.
Yeah,
and 1998 against Sparty, because both of those. Yeah, and especially 96, because I think they definitely would have won the national championship.
Sure.
And you can make, and you've tried to make the case that they would have split in 96.
Well, I'm making the case that we're awarding them a share of a national championship in 1996.
Yeah, you can
but
make
if they're
that.
Undefeated, they're the only undefeated team in the country. Yes. They are the national champion.
You know what's interesting, Mark, is kind of the high and low of that year, because that has to be I just said that's one of the 2 worst losses of the Cooper era. And then you flip it to probably the greatest win of the Cooper era in
Yeah.
1996 against Jake the Snake in Arizona State in the Rose Bowl. By the way, Steve Spurrier should have sent cash or gift cards or whatever to John Cooper for helping them win the national title. He also should send a lot of those things to John Makovic, whose
Yes.
Texas team beat Nebraska in the first ever Big 12 title game that opened it up for them to get that second chance at Florida State.
With James Brown at quarterback.
Yeah, pretty good backfield of Ricky Williams and Priest Holmes.
Yes.
Not
Now,
bad.
I don't know if you felt this way, but it was just an odd feeling for me, having grown up with, of course, the Michigan game being
Yep.
everything,
Yeah.
and so wanting Ohio State to win a Rose Bowl, because I had never seen them win a Rose Bowl in the games that I had
Yeah.
seen, that they were at that point 0-2 in the Rose Bowl. You know, I
Right.
missed those Archie years in the Rose Bowl. So desperately wanted to see them win a Rose Bowl. And it was just odd. I never thought that I would be watching Ohio State win a Rose Bowl after having lost to Michigan.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy the way that season went. I wonder if that after that loss, you got to get credit to players and certainly the coaches for getting the team ready to play that game against
Yeah.
that Arizona State team, and when Arizona State had everything on the line in that game. And,
Absolutely. Yeah.
that was it. And that Arizona State's team stopped the Nebraska freight train earlier that
Yes.
year. Remember that?
19-0.
Yeah, shut them out.
And I'm trying to think who played.
By the way, did you get to the controversial? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mark.
That was oh shoot. Who played? There was a great defensive end for that Arizona State team. Anyway, go ahead. Go ahead.
Rogers.
Yes.
Yeah, it was a guy. I think it was Derek Rogers. Yeah, they
Derek
had
Rogers.
him, and then they
Yes.
had the late Pat Tillman on that defense.
Yeah.
Yeah, the late Pat Tillman. They ran through the Pac-12. They won some close games that year, I remember, on their way to that undefeated team. But by the way, I wanted to get to the controversial years. I know you already dealt with 1997, but let's start with the first 2 years of the 90s, 90 and 91. Now, in 90, I just tuned in, so you may have already, broached this subject, but on schedule, Mark Rogers top 25 that makes sense.
Yes.
Didn't Colorado have that much of a stronger schedule? I know it took them 5th down at Missouri to win that game, but nevertheless.
Yeah, if we're going to approach it from that standpoint, we'll give Colorado's schedule a look here. Give me just a second. We'll pop it up here. Yeah, certainly their schedule was much tougher than Georgia Tech. It's going to be hard for us to find a ranked team on the Georgia Tech schedule.
Yeah, I think the only ranked team they beat was Nebraska in the bowl game. I remember that they had who was it that Colorado beat? They beat Nebraska. Obviously, they beat Notre Dame in the bowl game. I remember that loss to Illinois.
Yeah, so they lost to Illinois by 1 point. That was an Illinois team that played, I believe, in the Citrus Bowl. I get some of those years confused, either the Citrus or the Hall of Fame Bowl, and I don't remember if that was the Illinois team under Jeff George that lost to Clemson or beat Colorado. One of those Illinois teams. We're going to see like an 8-4 record here. 8-4 Illinois. Yeah. And they lost to Clemson 30-0. There we go.
Oh, wow. Was that the George team or was that the Jason Verduzco team?
1990 would have been, I'm almost positive that would have been Jeff George. I know he was there in 89. I'll double check on that.
Okay. It's after he transferred, because he transferred in from Purdue, right, Mark?
Miami and then Purdue. Yes, he was one of the first ever played for 3 teams.
Yeah, I always thought that guy had a rocket arm and a nickel brain.
Yeah, he did. He did.
He was kind of lacking it in between the ears, Jeff George, as I always said for years. Yeah, that schedule.
Okay, so you're right. 1990, he was the first pick in the 1990 NFL draft. So yeah, he played on that 89 team and then not on the 1990 team.
Right. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. That's back when Illinois had good teams. Remember, Cooper could never beat Illinois for like the longest period of time.
Yeah, he lost 5 in a row.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Makovic had good teams there. You know, late 80s, early 90s.
Oh yeah. Simeon Rice, Kevin Hardy.
Yeah. But I thought Colorado had a slightly. I know that Georgia Tech had a better record that year, but you know, Colorado had a loss and a tie that year, but I just thought, based on schedule, I thought you could make the case. Did you already do just like a video on this one, Mark?
So yes, I did. I did a video on this, and we're looking at Colorado right now. And of course, we don't know where these teams landed exactly, but just based on the rankings at kickoff, they tie Tennessee, who was number 8 in the country. They lose by 1 point on the road in Champaign to the number 21 team. They finished 8-4, so they finished about around that number 21 ranking. They beat Texas by a touchdown on the road, who was number 22 in the country. They play number 12 Washington. They win that by a touchdown. They beat Oklahoma, a top 25 team. They beat Nebraska, who was, of course, always in the running for the conference championship, and they were number 3 in the country. And then, of course, the Notre Dame game.
Yeah. The fake clip on Rocket Ismail's punt return that would have won it. The phantom clip that helped Colorado that year. Yeah, I think that the Colorado has a little bit better grape. 91 also interesting too. I was going to go there between Washington and Miami. I'm sure you've done a video on that one, right, Mark?
Yes, I've done a video on both of these seasons. Yes.
Yeah, I think Miami had pretty much 3 quality victories that stick out that year. They won a close one over Penn State early in the year. I watched that game. And then, you know, of course, Bobby Bowden's kicker eluded him in Tallahassee in what was one of the games of the century in 91 against Florida. That was the field goal games. And then they took Nebraska to the woodshed in the bowl game, as I remember. Those are where I remember their 3 best wins in 91 for Miami.
Yes, we're still on Georgia Tech here. I just went
Oh,
there.
okay, my bad.
No, that's okay. You transitioned us, but I had already clicked on this Georgia Tech schedule. I was just curious. Maybe a little bit better than I gave them credit for. Clemson was number 15 in the country. They beat them by 2. And that's the Clemson team that destroyed Illinois in the bowl game. And that I remember this. I remember Jim Nantz calling this game on CBS between number 1 Virginia and Georgia Tech. Now, that Virginia team was number 1 at the time.
Oh, that's right.
They collapsed. They finished, I think, 8-4.
You know who beat them? Didn't they end up playing Tennessee that year?
In the Sugar Bowl. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a good game.
Yeah, I think that was a 23-22 game.
Yeah, 2 good future NFL receivers in that game, and Carl Pickens and Herman Moore.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I remember watching that game. That was one of those bowl games that I caught that year. Yeah, you're right. That Virginia team did. Was Terry Kirby on that team, Mark?
Terry Kirby should have been on that team, right? Yeah.
Yeah, they had a couple NFL
went to the Browns.
Probably on that team.
Okay. Well, I'll give Georgia Tech a little bit more credit for but it's just disappointing when you know a team's playing for a national championship and they're playing a 9-2 Nebraska team that's like number 13 in the country.
Right. Yeah.
In the Citrus Bowl.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, I think that 91's the interesting year because those are the 3 quality wins that I can remember for Miami. Was beating Penn State in a close one at home in the Orange Bowl, and then beating Florida State because Florida State's kicker choked that short field goal,
Oh yeah.
and then just thumping um, Nebraska in the orange.
Now, as I recall, that Penn State game, and we're going to toss the results up here in just a second. That Penn State game, they were down late in that game, and they threw one over the top to somebody like a Lamar Thomas or somebody,
Mhm.
Randall Hill, who just went like 80 yards for a touchdown to win the game.
Yeah, it was a one. Those were the two one possession games I remember from Miami in '91 that were really good games. Was Penn State and, of course, the Florida State game.
That Houston game, that was one of those imposter Houston teams that went down to Miami, and the game was really hyped, and
Hmm.
David Klingler at quarterback,
Oh yeah.
and then they got shellacked.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I thought that their schedule was decent. Now, Washington that year, I'm trying to think of anybody, if they played anybody in non-conference, and how good the Pac-10 was. Because I don't know if they beat a really good USC team in '91, and how good the Pac-10 was in '91 outside of Washington. If
Yeah,
you even
so
use, yeah,
I'm sorry, quickly here. Syracuse was one of their wins in the Big East, and they were a 10-2 team. But other than that, look at the rest of that. Look at the rest of that conference. That's when they were just forming the Big East. So look at the records in conference. They still hadn't even. They had to merge like old schedules and new schedules and just kind
yeah.
of slap it together. So they didn't even really have a full conference season. There is kind of odd.
Yeah, Syracuse in the early '90s, they had those good teams. I still remember Ohio State thumping them up in the Carrier Dome in '92,
Yeah.
the Marvin Graves team.
Kirk Herbstreit at quarterback.
Yeah. Old Paul Pasqualoni coached those teams.
Yeah, that Ohio State team gave me a little hope on that night against
Yeah.
Syracuse. So here's
Yeah.
the Washington team. Well, they went out to Nebraska and won by 15 points.
Okay.
If you see that there, and they beat
Yeah.
Cal, who was number 7 at the time. Now Cal finished 10-2.
Okay.
They beat them by a touchdown.
Yep.
And none of these teams were ranked at the time. They
Well,
only played 2 ranked teams at the time of kickoff.
Well, they closed strong, thumping Desmond Howard in the Rose Bowl.
Oh, they sure did thump them.
Yeah.
That score looks better for Michigan than it actually was. That game was 34-7 for one thing, and Michigan scored late, and Washington could have scored late and just knelt down at like the 8-yard line.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that Washington team with Entman and Brunell at quarterback, didn't they have that tailback that was good too? I think was it Napoleon Kaufman?
Napoleon Kaufman.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, the team up north did get their revenge next year when Tyrone Wheatley went off on them.
Yep. They did. Very good of you, sir, to acknowledge that.
They did. That was a good Rose Bowl game that next year.
Yes. 38-31, I believe.
Yeah, that was a kind of that classic Big Ten Pac-10 battle where Washington had the passing game with Brunell, and they had the running game with Wheatley. So yeah, I think I mean 92 seemed pretty clear cut. I think that there was no real controversy 92 as far as I can remember, Mark.
No.
I think those were the 2 undefeated teams, and then Alabama, in a surprise to a lot of people, took them behind the woodshed. Or did you see that one coming?
No, I did not.
Okay.
I was wowed by the Miami offense and speed at the time. And yes, Jay Barker completing 45% of his passes with whatever he had. If we pulled up his numbers from that year, it's laughable. So
oh yeah,
that was a series of Alabama just Bootzilla's letting us know George Teague had a pick in that game. I think Miami.
They had a great defense that year. That Alabama 92
they had the
defense
2 ends.
Was. Yep.
They had Curry and Copeland at defensive
Yeah,
end.
Teague and Antonio Langham in that secondary was pretty good too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I was surprised by that one. 93, is the controversial year. And I know that Notre Dame has a really good gripe, but and I know you never bought into this, Mark, but losing late just kills you. You know, it does. I
Why?
mean, what's
Well, it obviously does, but it doesn't have to.
yeah. Yeah, it was crazy because the week before they get their biggest win, and then that Boston College team rolls in and pulls the upset.
Yeah, well, that Boston College team finished 9-3 and number 13 in the country. They weren't an awful team.
No, they were a good team. Glenn Foley at quarterback, Tom Coughlin coached that team.
Yes.
Yeah, the real gripe that year had to be poor West Virginia, who went
Yes.
undefeated.
Going undefeated. Now, nobody in the aftermath obviously thinks that they really were deserving or
Oh yeah,
would have won a national championship, but all being fair, they should have had an opportunity.
yeah. There was Spurrier. Yeah, Florida took him to the woodshed.
Yes.
Yeah, I tell you what, Florida State not only caught breaks from maybe the voters that year, but they also caught some breaks. Do you remember that title game between Nebraska and Florida State that year? There were some dubious calls in that game. If
Oh,
you ever
sure.
go back and do a rewatch of that Nebraska Florida State game,
Yeah.
I think William Floyd fumbled the ball, and there was some controversy in that game, man. And Nebraska really outplayed them that night, I thought.
Oh, yeah,
Florida
they
State
did.
was lucky to win that one.
They did.
It was
Yeah.
like everybody wanted to get Bobby Bowden a national title at that time, it seemed like.
Yeah, our guy Mike Ford is asking who West Virginia played that particular season.
They'd be good teams. They beat a pretty good Miami team. They beat, I believe they beat BC, who was decent. And I forget who else they beat.
Well, they beat Louisville by 2
Mhm.
points, who at the time was number 17 in the country. There's the Miami win at the end of the year, 17-14. They beat
Mm.
that BC team that beat
Mhm.
Notre Dame. They beat them
Right.
17-14. So they had consecutive 17-14 wins. And let's see if we go up to the Big East standings. Yeah, Miami and Boston College were good. Virginia Tech was good, 9-3, and Syracuse was okay. And that really was their season right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was an okay schedule.
Yeah, it wasn't bad. I mean, maybe that wasn't the best Miami teams in '93. But I think that some people thought that like you said, maybe they got exploited in that Sugar Bowl by Florida too.
Yeah. Now our West Virginia contingent, they will swear that West Virginia didn't approach that game correctly because they were so let down about not playing for a national championship. That's what they will tell you.
Everybody says that. I remember, you know what? And I respect Alabama. But remember, I never bought when Alabama was disinterested in playing Oklahoma in 2013 and they didn't
Yeah.
care. So, I mean, yeah, who cares? And then they lost and they were like, oh, we didn't care about that game. Really? I mean, come on.
Yeah. I don't like we
didn't care about that game.
Yeah.
To me, that's just BS.
I am with you.
The real year, by the way, controversial. Last year I want to get to, Mark, was that 94 year. I mean, I'm not a huge Penn State fan, but I feel for Joe Pa in 94.
Oh, I do too. We reviewed it, and if you look at the results, you can see why the voters did what they did. Is that Nebraska, I believe, had one game that was somewhat close, but they pretty much pummeled everyone. Penn State was en route to doing the same thing, and then they stumbled and struggled late against Indiana and Illinois.
That's it. Yep. Yeah, the Indiana game, I think, was that game because Penn State was number one, I think, for a large portion of that year. And, well, the Indiana game was misleading. They scored like a meaningless touchdown at the end of that game. I remember watching that game, and
they were both misleading.
What's that?
both of those games were misleading. The final score 35-29 and 35-31.
Right, right. But I mean, in the Penn State maybe had two competitive games. Or the game at the Big House was a good game,
Yes.
early in the year. And then they did have to come back to beat Illinois. Those were their only two real competitive games. And Nebraska had one competitive game, and it was pretty much their bowl game. They did take to the woodshed that undefeated Colorado team, which was very impressive.
Yeah, here's Penn State. Penn State starts out the season, after they completely shellacked Minnesota. They've got a number 14 USC team that didn't finish quite that high at 38-14. And then they just truck everyone. We obviously remember what happened in Happy Valley. I was explaining that to somebody who called in that was wanting to know about Penn State in 94. A good Ohio State team, certainly nothing close to vintage, just a good team.
Right.
That actually got better after that game.
Yeah. Cooper got his first victory over the team up north that year. Might have saved his job actually in 94.
So, David, in addition to those two close calls, and again, on the scoreboard, close calls against Indiana and Illinois, what also hurt Penn State is that Oregon showed up at the Rose Bowl at 8-3.
Yeah.
And
but they beat them by 3 scores, Mark.
They did, and they were up actually. Oregon had to score late to make it 38-20. It was 38-13.
Yeah. I mean,
but there was a lot of, you just mentioned the Bobby Bowden favoritism. Well, Tom Osborne was playing for a first national championship here.
True. That's true.
And after all those disappointments against Oklahoma and then against Miami, I think there was something in play there as well.
Yeah, but I mean, well, they did it. They've done splits before, and they did splits after it. So,
but it's not a collaborative effort. If it was, then you would just say, hey, guys, you vote for Penn State. We're going to vote for Nebraska or vice versa.
Yeah. I mean,
you have individuals voting.
Yeah, that's a tough one because that might have been Paterno's best team, wouldn't you say, Mark? You've seen a lot of
that defense a little bit. I don't know that their defense was really that good.
That's true. Their offense was just kind of overwhelming with Collins and Kanjana Carter and that crew. Yeah.
Kyle Brady, I tell you.
Bobby Ingram, good underrated wide receiver, very good player. Yeah. Yeah. I think that that kind of covers it. 95 was pretty much cut and dry. We talked about 96 and 97. 98 somewhat controversial, and I think 99 was fairly cut and dry, wasn't it, Mark?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And probably Bowden's best team, that 99 team. So.
Yeah, it's difficult for me to look at years like 98 because Tennessee has to be confirmed as a national champion, as an undefeated team. But again, just the mess that ensued in trying to determine who they would play. That's what tears up a lot of these seasons is there being a questionable selection of who would have played the number one team.
Yeah, that's really, it's, also, who should be playing them, just kind of like you do in the playoff years, who should be in it, is as much the question as anything else. So, all right, good stuff. Hey, when are you coming forward? When's your next decade coming out, Mark?
That's a great question. Well, we'll get together here soon. Maybe it might be Friday night.
Okay.
We shall see.
All right. Well, keep up the good work. Keep up the cardio. And
you as well, David.
All right. You have yourself a good one, my friend.
Good to talk to you tonight. Have a good one.
Take care.
All right, folks. I think that about wraps it up. Other than, yes, I'm sorry. I almost forgot the super chat coming down from Beverly Furl. And this is a really good question that I may not do justice considering it's been so long. But Beverly is asking, Mark, can you break down the downfall of Nebraska football and any factors that stand out to you as to how they went from Bama to Bowling Green? Well, wow. That's a bit harsh, but it's not too far off considering they lost to Georgia Southern. this last season. So that's pretty much a Bowling Green type of game. And then they were Bama. They were more dominant, arguably, than Bama for a shorter period of time. But still, as we were just discussing, team of the 90s, probably. More peaks than Florida State. Florida State was extremely consistent, but considering that Nebraska took them down to a last-second field goal, and that was one of 2 Florida State national championships, and actually I just stripped that away from FSU, so they only have the one, 1999. That, Nebraska was just that dominant. Man, they were dominant. Okay, what happened? Well, the obvious answer is, first and foremost, Tom Osborne. Once Tom Osborne left, they slipped. They didn't crash. They were really good under Frank Solich in 1998 and 1999. They had really good teams. And of course, in 2001, they got themselves a quarterback in Eric Crouch who could run their system. And they were top 10 good. They weren't as good as they needed to be to show up in a BCS championship game. And really, Nebraska has not contended for a national title since 2001, despite fielding 2 really good defenses led by Ndamukong Suh in 2008 and 9 to play in the Big 12 championship and almost win 2. So it's been since 1999 in terms of winning a conference championship, and 01 contending for a national championship. And the only thing I can point to is step number 1 in that downfall is Tom Osborne. They never replaced him. They went the route, Beverly, of loyal, trusted assistant, and did not go out to a national audience and say, let's look for the next Tom Osborne. Let's bring in somebody. And I'm not saying that this would have been an easy fit, but let's bring in somebody that fits our culture, but who is just as much of a leader and has as much weight as Tom Osborne, because then the recruiting fell off as well. They just didn't have that presence. One of the great legends of college football. It is hard to replace. We're seeing in a few places where that was addressed better than it was at Nebraska, and Ohio State and Oklahoma come to mind, where they've been able to replace legends recently and been able to stay on that same level. But mostly anywhere else, John McKay left USC and John Robinson took over, and they were able to maintain. But USC slid after Pete Carroll, and we'll see what happens to Clemson and Alabama and Georgia after those 3 coaches move on. But that's going to be quite some time. Even Kansas State at its level took a decline. And Kansas State was not in Nebraska's league by any stretch, but Kansas State reached its zenith under Bill Snyder. And when he left, they went to a trusted assistant who was not good enough for the job, and they regressed. Now they brought back Bill Snyder after 3 or 4 years, and they popped back up to a better position. So that's the number one obvious issue, is that once Tom Osborne left, they lost that legend who brought in recruits, who just made sure that everyone felt great trust and confidence in the program and that everything was going to be all right. But they made it through most of the 2000s as a top 25 level program. And then the next hit was when they went to the Big Ten and lost their recruiting ties to Texas in particular and to the Plains. That was the next one. They went for the money over the football brand. And certainly the football brand has been enhanced, being connected to the Big Ten in such a way. But losing that recruiting, they're in the middle of nowhere now from a recruiting standpoint, where it's difficult for them to bring in the kind of players that they need to compete at the national level. So that's my answer, not being close to the situation, but just watching it from afar and covering college football. At the time that coaching transition took place, I was entrenched in the SEC, covering SEC football every week down in Mississippi. All right, folks, thank you so much all for being here. We will get together soon and we will go through the 1980s. The 1980s are next here at the Voice of College Football. I was expecting to come out with a bang today with our preseason predictions. We released our Washington video, but folks, check it out. Give it a look and let us know what you think. And we will continue with our prediction videos. Right, folks, appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. Check out our Thursday schedule as we post our schedule for all the channels on the entire network every morning. So check it out on our community page. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. We would love for all of you to be subscribed here at the Voice of College Football. We will see you next time.